Hey, what's up everybody? Adobe Masters here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create a vignette in Adobe Premiere Pro. So a vignette is really important because it allows you to draw attention to a certain part of the footage. Basically, our eyes are attracted to contrast and to exposure, and so creating a good vignette can actually draw our eyes to an area of the piece of footage and then sort of reduce the exposure and the contrast of all the other areas so that our eyes are subconsciously drawn to that area. So basically when we look at this piece of footage, instead of looking at the entirety of it, we might focus down on this or down onto the plane or something like that. That's really the essence of a vignette, and that's what we're going to be going over today. We're going to be going over a sort of a simple technique, just a drag and drop sort of technique, and then a little bit more of a complex one so that you can kind of have a lot more wiggle room and a little bit more flexibility in it. So let's get started. Our first one is really simple. All we're going to do is use Luma Tree. Easiest way to do that is to just go over here and we're going to search for Luma Tree like so, and then if you want, you got to spell it right though. And if you want, you can just click this 32-bit to reduce all those redundant stuff at the top, and then it's right down under Video Effects Color Correction. That's probably even a quicker way to do it. Just look in Video Effects Color Correction Luma Tree, or you can click on the Color tab up here. Once you have it, go ahead and click on your piece of footage. Click the checkbox, and these will all probably be zeroed out like so. And then now you can begin building your vignette right here. So what we need to do is we need to grab the amount and drag it to the left. If we drag it to the right, that's going to create a white vignette. That's good for sort of like dream sequences. But the left is going to create that black vignette that's going to focus us towards the center. If we reduce the feather here, we can kind of see what we're working with. If we reduce the midpoint, it's going to bring it down. That's going to bring it up. And then the roundness, left is going to go to a rounded rectangle. So if we bring the midpoint down, you can kind of see that. Right is going to go into a circle like so. So what we want to do is I like to keep this right at the center at 0 because I like the oval, and then maybe midpoint up to just a little bit before it's touching, and then just sort of feather it out until it looks nice like so. Maybe we can expand the midpoint just a little bit more, or yeah, something like that. And now this is a really simple effect, but what it's doing is it's focusing our attention to the center really nicely. Now, in this particular shot, we don't actually have anything interesting in the center, so it doesn't really work. So what we can do is we can actually adjust this, scale this in, and maybe like focus on the plane, and this will really start to show the sort of focus that's being drawn onto it. So if we, maybe focus right there, drag it in a little bit like so, and yeah, that kind of looks good right about there. Maybe just a little bit more of a zoom, and then a little bit of adjustment like that, and so that's a good place to start. But if you'll notice, our vignette is now not really doing anything at all, and that's because it's being applied to the entire footage as a whole around this edge. So a lot of times if you're doing zooms or stuff like that, your vignette might look off and it might look like it's a part of the footage instead of what it's supposed to be, like a part of the quote-unquote lens or view into the footage. So to fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn off the vignette for this big one. We're going to click on this, we're going to right click, and we're going to click on the nest button right here. All this is doing is it's going to create a sequence, bring that into this one, and then create a secondary sequence that's going to hold our footage. If you don't really know what that means, that's okay. Just do it and you'll be perfectly fine from then on. If you need to access your footage, just double click right here and it's going to open up that sequence where the footage was. So let's go back into here, and you can see that's green, which means it's a sequence. And let's go ahead and fit this back. Now we can do the exact same thing like before, get Luma Tree on here, and now if you notice when we drag this, it actually affects the view instead of the piece of footage and its zoom level. And then if we want to adjust the zoom, make sure you double click on this and go and adjust the footage's zoom, and then go back to here for the rest of that, the adjustments. So now what we can do is we can really just sort of dial in on this. Let's reduce the feather so we see where we're going. Let's dial it in, maybe like make it a little rounder like so. And then now feather that out, and then expand that just a touch. And then so now we're kind of really focusing on this right here. And the rest of it is sort of like the wayside. If I looked at this, I'd be like looking into the cockpit, maybe something's going on in there. Maybe that's what they're trying to show us. And so this really focuses our attention. But what I like to do is I like to add a little bit of an extra kick to it. And that is to go into here, and let's turn off this 32-bit right here, and then to go into camera blur. We're going to take the camera blur and we're going to drag it onto this piece of footage. Now the problem is that this is a 4K piece of footage and camera blur is extremely power intensive, so it's best not to drag this onto anything that large. 1080p is probably the largest depending on your computer that you can handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch to a low res copy, which you can see is exactly the same. I already set it up for this. So all the same steps, just with a lower res footage. That's just what I'm doing right here. So let's go back and let's grab camera blur and drag and drop it onto here. And you'll notice that everything goes blurry immediately. What we want to do is we want to create a little ellipse mask like so. And then what we want to do is we want to invert it. So what we did was we clicked on nested sequence. We made sure camera blur was added into here. We then went up to effect controls, scrolled down into camera blur, and then clicked on the little circle button right there to create a mask. And now what we have is a circle, but this is really, really intense, and that's not what we're going for here. So let's go maybe like to 6 on this aspect, and then let's add a really, really big feather to this, maybe like 200. And then let's click on the mask and let's adjust it outward to sort of more fit the vignette a little bit, to give it a little bit more space. And you can already see my computer is lagging just a little bit from this, but that's okay. On 4K, it wasn't even movable. Like, you couldn't do any of this. It would take maybe 2 minutes to render every time. But now you see that we've added this blur as well. So with the right amount of blur, it won't be distracting. So maybe let's bring this down to like 4. It won't be distracting, but what we're doing is removing contrast and exposure from the edges so that we're really hyper-focused on our center point. And that, I find, makes a really, really good vignette. Now, it doesn't really matter what's going on in the background. We're really focused on right here and what's going to happen right here. That's the easy way of creating the vignette, using this over here. But maybe we want to use a slightly more complex version. So let's go back over here. Let's go into this nested sequence here, and let's just forget about the whole other part. And now we're going to zoom this back out to 50, default this back, and let's say instead of focusing on this plane, what we want to do is we want to focus on, let's focus on these cars in this line right down here. You can't do that with these tools over here. It's just not going to work. You don't have enough control. So what we can do instead is we can create our own vignette. How we're going to do that is we're going to go up to File, then New, and then Black Video. We're going to click OK on that, and then we're going to go into our project and drag the black video on the top. Make sure it's the length of our piece of footage. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into here. We're going to make sure we're clicked on the black video. And then we're going to create a square right here. We're going to make sure to invert it like so. You might want to uninvert it while you're creating the layer. And let's actually drag this down to 0 so we can get this right. So now we have this sort of layer, the mask created. So now let's click and drag these to where we want them. So we want one there, the other there. And then we kind of want to accent all these cars in the center right here. So maybe like that. You can, if you want to like curve it, you can add a second point like so. Sort of get a little bit of a curve down there on the bottom to fit a little bit better. And so now what we have right here is if we bring the opacity back up, it's blacking it out. So now we want to invert it. And now what we're going to do is once it's inverted, we need to feather it out some. And you're going to notice it starts to get a little bit like the other one, and then let's reduce the opacity really far down as well. And now if you move it to, now we have sort of like control over it right here, so we can kind of move it around, adjust the feather here, and suddenly our view is, you know, reduced here and reduced down here. And now all we have is this center right here lit up. So you can kind of really, really increase it if you want to hyper focus it, or you can kind of back it off to maybe like a little bit more of a softer one. But our focus is now no longer on the plane or the background or anything else. Our focus is on these aspects right here. So maybe like you're making a training video of how to park the car in this right place. You don't want all this in it. You want to make sure that only this is in focus. This is a good way to draw the attention to that area. We can do the exact same thing with the camera blur. If we drag the camera blur onto this piece of footage down here, we can make that exact same box and blur out the edges as well to really hyper focus our attention to the center right here. So that's a little bit more of a complex way. You're using a mask and you're actually creating black video, and you're actually creating the vignette yourself instead of just having it pre-assigned. This will cover like probably 80% of the time you use it, and then sometimes you might want to use something a little bit more customization. Maybe you want the circle to the left or the right. Then you just go into the black video and you can create it like so. That is going to be it on this tutorial. If you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and throw them in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them. Like I keep saying, YouTube is still being a little bit weird on that thing. So if you got any really burning questions, throw them in Adobe Masters official@gmail.com. If you want to see more videos similar to this one, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I make a video on Adobe related content every other day. And until next time, guys, see ya.